Hello everyone, my name is Zane Goodman, and in this session we are going to be building a solution in Microsoft Fabric. So far, you've walked through connecting to data in Power BI, creating a semantic model, building a report, and more. Now, as we bring Fabric into the conversation, we have to ask an important question, especially as Power BI analyst. Why? Why should we use Fabric? What benefits does Fabric bring to the table? And where exactly do we start? So let's answer those questions and more in this session. To begin, let's briefly talk about two major features of Microsoft Fabric: OneLake and Direct Lake Mode. OneLake is a centralized location for all of your organization's data, sometimes referred to as OneDrive for your data. Think of it as a massive lake that holds not just the work that you do in Fabric, but all of the data that you need to store as well. OneLake organizes all tabular data, that is, data in columns and rows, using a common format called Delta Parquet. Now, what matters here is not necessarily Delta Parquet itself, but instead the decision to keep all tabular data in this common format. Now, this is extremely powerful for a couple of reasons. Number one, it allows for multiple engines like Power Query, Spark, and T-SQL to access the same copy of the data. No need to create duplicate copies. It also enables different people across your organization to work with the same data set without duplication, as long, of course, as the right permissions are in place. For example, you could share a Lakehouse with your colleagues, build multiple Fabric semantic models off of the same data, or even perform cross-database querying using a Fabric warehouse, all leveraging the same underlying data. Now, you might be wondering, how exactly do we get data into OneLake? Well, that happens through the various data stores available inside of Fabric. Let's use the Lakehouse as an example. For now, just think of a Lakehouse as a container that stores data. Well, if OneLake is that giant lake we were talking about a moment ago, then your Lakehouse is like a container floating inside of that one lake. This means when you add a table to a Lakehouse, both the table and the Lakehouse itself are actually stored in, you guessed it, OneLake. Now let's take this a step further. Let's say you create a semantic model in Fabric and you load it with data from OneLake. Now, what type of storage mode would be used? Would it be direct query? Would it be import mode? No, actually, it would be neither. Instead, you actually get something called Direct Lake mode. Direct Lake combines the best of both direct query and import mode, connecting your data to your reports without needing to query the data set live and without duplicating the data. This is possible because of OneLake. The tables in your semantic model are the tables stored in OneLake. It's actually currently the most performant way to connect data to your reports, and even better, as your data updates in Fabric, your semantic model updates automatically as well. And that means so does your report. Now that brings up another important question. What about all of the work we've already done today in Power BI Desktop? Can we use that data inside of Fabric? The good news is yes, we can. That's an option called OneLake integration, which allows you to bring data from a Power BI semantic model directly into Microsoft Fabric. So without further ado, let's dive right in and get started. All right, everyone, so here I am inside of my Power BI report, something you are familiar with. One of the things that you might notice as we go through this next example is that you're not going to see the measures that Mitchell had created previously. And the reason for that is this session is going to be separate from the rest of the sessions. That is because Fabric offers a different pathway forward to ingest our data, to transform our data, and then to load that data somewhere, and then of course start to report on that still using Power BI. And so I'm going to show you today how we could build out a solution similar to what we've done today, but inside of Microsoft Fabric, and we'll see some of the benefits that that can give us to answer that question as to why it is we would use Fabric to begin with. But to start, what we're going to talk about is OneLake integration. OneLake integration is a way that we can take the data that we have inside of our Power BI semantic model. We can then load that data or export that data as delta tables inside of the OneLake in Fabric. And what this will allow us to do is start to leverage the data that we have here that we're using for this report inside of Microsoft Fabric. This is just one way that we can use to do this. There's not necessarily a magic button that we can just click and then change all of our sources to move over into OneLake and allow our reports to start using direct lake mode. I wish it was that easy, but this is one option that we have to use the data that we have spent time curating. And then we're going to get started inside of Fabric and learn how can we connect to this data again, and what methods and tools are there in Fabric for us to perform the transformations and more that we've already done so far today. So I'm going to select Publish to publish this report and the semantic model to my Fabric workspace. And I'll type in the name of my workspace and select. This is going to take just a moment. It's going to take everything that we have here, publish it up to that workspace, and then we'll jump over into Fabric and see what other settings do we need to apply to get this working properly. It says that it has just successfully published this report up to the Fabric service. So I'm going to select Got It, and I'll see it inside of Fabric. All right, y'all, so here I am inside of Microsoft Fabric. I'm in my Learn with the Nerds workspace. And I see now I have a report and semantic model coming over from Power BI Desktop. Now there's a setting that I need to turn on in order to allow the tables that I have in my semantic model here to load inside of OneLake as delta tables, mind you. So I'm going to select the ellipsis right next to my semantic model. And I'm going to scroll on down to Settings, continue down, and I'm going to pop out OneLake integration and turn this on, and then select Apply. This will take here just a moment, and once it has been applied, I can go back to my workspace, and there is another requirement that I have to meet. I need to refresh this semantic model. Now, this could be a refresh that you're waiting on that's scheduled, or for me, I'm just going to manually refresh it. This will take just a moment, and I'll see you when it's finished. Now that the semantic model has been refreshed and we've enabled OneLake integration after publishing this up into our Fabric workspace, our next step is to connect to this semantic model in an interesting way. Our first step here is going to be to create a Lakehouse. So I'm going to select New Item, and I'll search for Lakehouse. And I'm going to name this Learn with the Nerds Lakehouse Project Management, and select to create this new Lakehouse. This is automatically going to load up my Lakehouse Explorer. And in the Lakehouse Explorer, we are able to create what is called a shortcut. A shortcut is a very powerful tool that uses OneLake, as we've been talking about, without duplicating any kind of data or changing who owns the data. We're actually able to go across the different data stores like lakehouses and warehouses and connect to tables there if we need to and if we are given proper access. And we're actually able to use those tables in other semantic models, or maybe we need to analyze them in some way. We can do that using shortcuts without ever copying the data. And that is because everything is inside of that Delta Parquet format inside of OneLake. And so we are going to leverage a shortcut here, but specifically to our semantic model. Because what went on behind the scenes with that semantic model was we were able to take the data in the Power BI semantic model and export them as delta tables that have been placed inside of OneLake. Now, they're inside of the semantic model still, technically, and that means that we need to make a shortcut to connect to them. So I'm going to select the ellipsis next to my tables section and select new shortcut. I'll select Microsoft OneLake, and we are going to look for our semantic model right here, our project management semantic model. And I'm going to select next. And now if I hit this drop down, I see all of my tables: date, employee, location, project tasks, and projects. I can now select next. I can rename them here if I would like. I'll finally hit create, and now I have connected to the tables as they were inside of the Power BI reports, inside of that semantic model. But I'm now able to work with them here inside of Fabric. All right, everybody, so our tables are inside of our Lakehouse. This is super powerful. We can start to use and leverage these tables as we see fit. But a few things to keep in mind. This particular feature is probably not something you're going to be using for all of your Power BI reports and semantic models. It does have some restrictions. For example, whenever we're exporting the tables into OneLake as Delta tables, the tables there inside of Power BI Desktop have to be using import mode. So if you have direct query, that's not going to allow you to export these tables into Fabric as Delta tables, unfortunately. Another thing to remember when doing this is your Power BI report is going to continue to function as is. So it's still going to be refreshing whenever you have that scheduled to refresh. It's still going to be using import mode, and you'll still need to keep on top of those refreshes. However, again, when that refresh occurs, then the Delta tables that have been exported will be updated, and then we'll see that updated here inside of the Lakehouse as well. Now, that being said, we still have to answer a big question, which is, sure, we have tables that we've brought in we can start using, but how are we going to use Fabric to start from the beginning, to go through that ETL process all the way down to analyzing our data? And there's many ways that we can start that process, but we are going to use a process I think is going to be very familiar to a lot of you, and that is going to be using a Dataflow Gen 2. So I'm going to open up my workspace again, and what we're going to do is create a new item, and this is going to be a Dataflow Gen 2 right here. This Dataflow we will call DF or Dataflow, load project data. And I'm going to select to create this data flow. So here I am inside of my data flow, y'all, and I imagine this is going to be very familiar to a lot of you because this is Power Query, and you might be thinking to yourself already, hey, maybe I don't have to redo a lot of my work. If this is Power Query, how does that connect to Power Query over inside of Power BI Desktop? And you'd be right to think that, and we'll talk about that here in just a little while. For now, though, let's kind of explore what we have. So this is Power Query, as you know and as you love. But we're going to start by getting data. I'm going to select More, and you're going to see if I hit New here, we have a lot of different data sources that we can connect to. What I care about is going to be SharePoint folder. Now this SharePoint folder is going to require me to get the root URL to where my file is. I have my connection made, and I'm going to select Next. Now this is going to bring me to a lot of different files and folders, but I care about our Learn with the Nerds data set. So I'm going to select to create, and this is going to bring in my list of files. I can then select the binary for Learn with the Nerds 2025, and this is going to give me my list of tables that I have available, or in this case, technically, we would be talking about different sheets inside of the Excel workbook. And here we go. We have everything that we need. Now we've already gone through in previous sessions connecting to this data. So we're just going to quickly create the different queries and assign them to the appropriate sheet so that we can start to create tables. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste this query a couple of times. Copy and paste this query a couple of times. Then I'm going to start with employee. So I'll bring employee here. I'll select the table that I want to bring back. And this will take just a moment. And there we go. There is our table. Now, this does not include any of the transformations that you walked through performing with Angelica. But that's okay for this example because guess what? Those transformations that you walked through with Angelica, it would be the same process here inside of the Dataflow Gen 2. So I'll leave this here as it is for now, and I'm going to name this employee. And I'm going to walk through and create the rest of the tables. So I'll go to the next query, and I'm going to select location, and I'll rename this to location. Awesome. Select the next query, and we need project tasks. I'll rename this as well. Beautiful. What is next on our list here? That is going to be projects. And now that that has been completed, you see I have a fifth query here, and this would probably be pointing to the date table. But remember that Angelica created that date table. We don't have it natively here inside of our Dataflow Gen 2 or inside of the data source that we're working with. So I'm actually going to right click and delete this query. And I'm going to show you something really, really cool about Power Query. I'm going to open up the Power BI report that we have. And I see that I have data up at the top. If I select transform data, you'll see I've got all of my tables, but I care about date. And what I'm simply going to do is right click, copy, minimize these two pages, go under my query section in Fabric, and paste. Oh, we gotta use Control V and paste that in. And you wouldn't believe it, not only does it give us our function that we can use here to create this date table, but it's gonna populate the date table here for us as well. This is so cool. We're able to connect in a completely different way than we've seen so far to queries that we have in other instances of Power Query. In this example, Power BI Desktop and the Power Query Editor. We're able to copy those queries and paste them here inside of the Dataflow Gen 2. Now this one was simple, it's just a date table. However, it's also fairly simple for other types of queries as well. If I had a different set of queries that connected to an Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 account, I could copy them from Power BI Desktop and paste them here. And the only thing that I would need to configure is my credentials to make sure that I actually can access that data. Not only is it going to copy the query, but it's going to copy all of the applied steps for us as well, allowing us to be able to use the work that we've already gone through and completed and not have to repeat that process again. So now that I have all of my tables here, our next step is going to be to load these as tables to a Lakehouse. But before we do that, I wanted to show you, if I go to the Home tab, I wanted to show you how we would be able to use Copilot here inside of a Dataflow Gen 2 to kind of help us through transformations or anything else that we would like to do to this data. Now, if I come up to the employee query here, I can see that I have headers, I have column names, but currently they are in the first row. Now, if you know Power Query, you know you could go over to transform, you could use first row as headers here, you could select this icon here and do the same thing. But I'm going to do this using Copilot for this demonstration. I'll open up Copilot and I'm just going to tell it what I want it to do. I have employee selected, so I'm going to say use the first row as headers for this query. It is going to take my prompt in, says it's going to be working on it here for just a moment, and in a second we'll see it says that it has added the following step to your query employee. Use first row as header. And you can see here that that change has been made and we are good to go, rocking and rolling. Now, of course, we could go farther with this, but you've already seen how we can use Power Query in a very similar fashion to apply these different transformations. Just know it's very similar here with the Dataflow Gen 2. It's the same Power Query, and you were even able to see that we're able to copy queries from elsewhere and paste them here inside of the Dataflow Gen 2. Now, our last step here is going to be to load these queries as tables to our Lakehouse. And if you have any experience with what's called the Dataflow Gen 1, then you would know that this is a really, really cool and awesome feature. Because now we are actually able to not only ingest the data and transform the data inside of this data flow, but we're also able to say, hey, you know what? Take all the work that I've done and send it over to a data destination, which is not something we were able to do in a Dataflow Gen 1. And so now that final step is to set up our data destination. However, we have tables already inside of our Lakehouse with these names. So we're going to go delete those here. Now, one of the cool features that we have with the Dataflow Gen 2 is that it is automatically going to save. So we're just going to select the X up at the top right and select yes. And then we are going to open up our Lakehouse. And I'm just going to quickly go ahead and delete these tables. All right, y'all, so all tables have been deleted. So I'm going to open up my data flow again, and we're going to start adding data destinations. I'm going to select Add Data Destination at the top. We could also go to the bottom right and select this plus icon here if we wanted to. We can see the supported data destinations currently are Lakehouse, Warehouse, SQL Database, Azure SQL Database, and Azure Data Explorer. But of course, I care about my Lakehouse. I'm going to select Next. And I'm going to open up my Learn with the Nerds workspace. And then finally select my Learn with the Nerds Project Management Lakehouse. This is where I can change the name of the table. I can also describe, hey, do I want to add this as a new table? Or am I going to be sending this to an existing table? I'll leave this as new table for now and select Next. We can come in here and we can start to change some of the settings. We can add column mapping here if we would like, so that we have the data that we brought in from the source still inside of the data flow as is, all of the columns. And then as we send it to a table somewhere in our Fabric environment, we're able to map how do we want that table to look like in that destination. We could use automatic settings, which we will, but if I uncheck this, you can see, hey, well, when it comes to our update method, when we come back in and say, well, we're going to want this to be on some kind of schedule, we're going to want this to either append data, or we're going to want it to replace or overwrite the table when anything has been updated. And then, of course, we also have different schema options available as well. Are we going to be working with a dynamic schema, or are we going to be working with a fixed schema? This is important to get right now. Whenever you go to load a new table, you set up these settings, then you can come back in the data flow after the first initial run of that data flow, and then change your data destination to save each table to an existing table now that it does exist. And then you would be able to see that these settings have been applied. Is it a dynamic schema on update? Is it a fixed schema? Are we appending our data, or are we replacing our data? But for me, I'm just going to use the automatic settings and select to save. All right, so that being the case, it's going to be the same process for all of these queries. So really quickly, I'm going to go ahead and add in a data destination for all of these queries. Okay, so data destinations have been added to each one of these queries, and I'm going to save them all as tables inside of my Lakehouse. I've made sure, of course, there should never be a data destination. You're blocked from adding one anyways for this function, but everything else, it's ready to go. And all I need to do is go to the bottom right and select Publish. This will take a good few minutes to finish publishing. So when it's done, I'll see you then. All right, everybody, so it looks like our Dataflow has finished publishing. And now there's only one way to make sure that it has, which is to go over into our Lakehouse, hover over our table section, hit that ellipsis, and hit refresh. And we should see in just a moment our tables have populated for us here inside of the Lakehouse. Now take a look at what we see here. We have date through projects. We know that they're delta tables because of that triangle there on the bottom right corner of the table icon as well. And these aren't shortcuts either. These are delta Parquet tables that have been loaded into this Lakehouse. And you remember what that means. That means that these tables are in a Lakehouse, and both the tables and the Lakehouse itself are in the OneLake. That is correct. So that being the case, we have our tables here inside of the Lakehouse. So what do we do now? Well, this is where we bring in the next step of the process. Well, we have the tables, but we don't have a semantic model. We had the semantic model from Power BI desktop, right? But that's not going to apply here. We have to create a new semantic model that is going to connect to these delta tables. There's a few ways that you can do this, but the way that we are going to use is to select New Semantic Model at the top of our Lakehouse Explorer. And I'm going to call this Project Management SM for Semantic Model. And actually, I'm going to call this Fabric SM, just to make sure there's a clear distinction between these two types of semantic models. Then I'm going to open up my tables section, and I'm going to bring all of them with me. And I'll select Confirm. This is going to automatically create for us a new semantic model, and we are going to see something that is very familiar again. And you wouldn't believe it, it has brought us here to a place that looks very familiar. It's a place where we're going to start to model out our data. Now, funnily enough, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my workspace. And the reason for that is I just want to show you something that I think kind of gets lost sometimes, which is how do you get back to this view if I just close out of this? It's not exactly right there in front of your face. So I just want to show this because I know sometimes whenever you're like, I got my semantic model, how exactly do I go back to the model view? Because if I go over to my model here and I click on it, it brings me here. But this isn't exactly the model view that I'm looking for. So what you can do is after you select it, you can select Open Data Model here, or if I'm in the workspace, I can select the ellipsis next to the semantic model, and I can select Open Data Model, and it's going to bring us right back here. Just something I like to show because sometimes it can be kind of weird to figure out where exactly that model view is. Now, the first thing I need to do now is go back to the top right and select the fact that I want to start to edit this out. And we're going to make relationships really quickly that we've created already in Power BI Desktop, but now we do need to recreate these relationships. So when it comes to building out a report that is going to be using direct lake mode, we are going to need to use a Fabric semantic model that is using our Delta Parquet tables. So it is a little bit of a drawback there. You're not just going to have an easy way to switch over your Power BI reports to using direct lake mode, unfortunately, and that's again because of OneLake. But there's so many awesome benefits to using these Fabric semantic models. Primarily, that is going to be the fact that we have the most performant method of connection, which is going to be direct lake mode. And so with that being said, I'm going to start creating some relationships the same exact way that we did just a little while ago in a previous session. So here I have every single one of my tables, and I'm going to select Manage Relationships. And I'm going to select to create a new relationship. The first relationship I'll make is from employee to location. And this is going to be on reporting location. So that'll be my key here. And then it's going to be my location name. That's what I'm going to set up here. And this is a many-to-one relationship, employee to location. And then I'm going to select to save. I have that relationship. Let's keep going. The next thing I'm going to do is create a relationship from project tasks, and I am going to connect this with date, because I need to grab my approval date for each of my projects and apply that with the date that I have in my date table. So I have approval date right here, and I have date here in my date table. This is not going to be a one-to-many. This will be a many-to-one. Always important. Make sure you're checking your cardinality whenever you're making these relationships, because sometimes it'll be automatic and it'll just know, but I wouldn't trust that all the time. Make sure that you're keeping an eye out for that. And I'll select to save, and let's keep going. Our next relationship is going to be project tasks again, but this time we want to connect to our employees. So it'll be project tasks, And then we are going to be connecting to our employee table. And this is going to be, it automatically recognized this one because we have the same name for each of these key columns. And this is also going to be a many to one. So I need to change that here as well. And I'll select save. I have one last relationship that I need to make. This is also going to be connecting to my project tasks table. But this time I'm going to connect to my projects. This should automatically populate for me. Yes, it will. Project ID to project ID. And this is also going to be a many to one. I'll select save and close. And we have our relationships set up. And this is exactly the same setup that we had before, where Angelica went through and created these relationships inside of the Power BI report. Now I've even modeled them in a similar fashion to what they look like over in the Power BI desktop there as well. The only thing that we're missing here is those additional transformations that you walk through with Angelica and the DAX measures that you walked through and created with Mitchell. Now, unfortunately, you do need to come back through and create these measures again. But the good news is there's not a huge or vast different way that you need to do this. You can simply create a new measure right here if you would like to. And just like that, you're able to create these measures here. Now, I won't walk through creating all of the measures that you went through with Mitchell because I want to make sure I make good use of your time, but you absolutely can if you would like. So I'm going to select the X here. And so now the only two things that we're really missing here is going to be those additional transformations that you walk through with Angelica and the DAX measures that you created with Mitchell. Now, the good news is that all you need to do to create those measures is to hit a new measure. It is unfortunate you have to repeat that process and add these measures in again, but you can very simply right here from the model view of this Fabric semantic model. Now, I won't walk through creating all of these with you again because I want to make sure I make good use of your time, and you already walked through that process with Mitchell. It's the exact same process here, but this time inside of Fabric. So with that being the case, I did say there's two of those major items we're missing, but really we're missing a big other piece too, which is the report. So we used Fabric so far to create a data flow, ingest data, load it to a Lakehouse, and then we created a semantic model using those tables. Now we've modeled it, and the next step would then be to add it to some kind of report, to start reporting on this now modeled data. So let's go ahead and do that. But the question would be, how exactly would we? Well, this is really cool. I'm going to open up Power BI Desktop. And I'll bring this over. Then I'm going to select a blank report. We're just going to start with a blank report. And so now what I need to do is to connect to my semantic model. I can come up to the OneLake catalog, and I'm going to select Lakehouses. You can already see, all right, we see a Lakehouse there, so we have that connection through the OneLake catalog to the Fabric service. I'm going to filter out my Lakehouses and just select my semantic models. And I can see I have Project Management Fabric Semantic Model. And I'm going to select to connect. Now, you also have the ability, as this is starting to connect, you have the ability now to edit your semantic model, Fabric semantic model, here inside of Power BI Desktop. You can go in, you can add in measures, and this is going to be live edits, meaning that when you create those edits, when you make those edits, they will be also made to the semantic model there inside of the Fabric service. It's a really cool feature. Check out our last month's Learn with the Nerds, where Mitchell, Manuel, and I walk through a process of using Power BI and Fabric together, and Manuel showed exactly that feature. It's very, very, very helpful. But for now, we're just going to leave our edits inside of the Fabric service. We've now connected to the semantic model here inside of the Power BI Desktop, and we can see that we have date, employee, and the rest of our tables. And if I look at the bottom of my screen, it says connected live to the Power BI semantic model, project management fabric SM. Now, the terminology here has not been updated to express really the difference between these two semantic models. They're used in almost the exact same way, but what matters is the type of connection. And so for a fabric semantic model, that is the only type of semantic model that is going to allow us to start to use direct lake mode, which is what this sentence down here is basically saying, that this connection is in direct lake mode. Meaning, when we have an update at the source in that SharePoint folder, and we refresh our data flow after adding in some additional configuration, of course, to either append or overwrite that table to apply those updates, what's going to happen is that Delta table inside of the Lakehouse will then be updated. And that means that the table inside of our semantic model will also be updated because they're the same table. They're not a copy. Both the Lakehouse table and the table inside of the semantic model are pointing to the exact same table object inside of the OneLake. And what that all means is that when that update happens, it is immediately going to show here inside of our reports, combining the best of direct query mode as well as import mode, where we're not querying data and we're not copying data either. We have the most performant method of connection here using Fabric semantic models and data that we've curated inside of Fabric itself. And now we have our Power BI report here connected to our data coming from our semantic model. We have it using direct lake mode, the most performant method available. And we've gone through a lot so far in this session. We saw how we can go through ingesting data, transforming that data using a Dataflow Gen 2, how we could even use Copilot to help us in that process, loading data into a Lakehouse, creating a semantic model, and we also saw how it is here just a moment ago to connect to that semantic model using direct lake mode in Power BI Desktop. We even went through some tips and tricks as well on how it is that you are able to use some of the work that you've already completed inside of Power BI and leverage that work here inside of Microsoft Fabric. I hope you enjoyed. I hope that you learned a lot as well. Now it's time to send it back over to Greg and then Allison to talk about effectively collaborating inside of SharePoint. I'll see you in the next one.